Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we are talking about making the part of Ottoline's fishing outfit here, which we're actually not making the anorak and all the culottes. There's a video on my channel already on how to sew the culottes, so I'll link that up here for you. But actually the top underneath this anorak, which is called the Fisherman's top. We quickly get to the page to show you that one. Oh, quick Claire. Never do it quickly whenever I'm trying to. And it's actually this one here, which is shown on Ottoline there. So it's in pink needle cord, so fine needle corduroy fabric, and it's in this book here, which is Luna Lapin and Friends, A Year of Making. So the book and all the supplies are available from Coolcrafting in the UK, and I'll pop their website up here for you so that you can go and have a browse should you wish to. And I want to give my thanks to a subscriber of mine called Pin and Tonic, as that person subscribed, sponsored, gave me money through my coffee account in order to sponsor this video. I'm not taking sponsorships now, I'm afraid, for Luna Lapin. So this is a long overdue video because I should have done this much sooner, and I do apologise to Pin and Tonic that I've not done it sooner, but I'm working on the basis that late is better than never. So anyway. But it's not turned out to be a straightforward pattern, and if you followed part one, then you'll know that I've had to make several alterations because the toile that I made, which is the patches garment, wouldn't fit over Ottoline's head. And what I did was I tried it on several different characters, and you can go back to the part one video if you want to in order to look at that first, and we tried that the toile on first to see if we could get it on for the different characters, and I've tried that on a few for you and let you know which ones it'll fit. As it didn't, I've had to make some alterations to the pattern. So part one is all about the alterations to the pattern. This video is how to sew it all. Apologies if you already knew that, but I didn't know if anybody would jump straight into part two or not. Hopefully not, but you never know. So this video is all going to be about cutting out the fabric and then sewing it all together and getting a lovely finish so that you're really happy with your fisherman's top for your character. But most importantly, that you know it's going to fit before you even start, and that's a really important part. So let me turn the camera down and we'll get started. In true Back to the Future fashion, as people who follow my videos will know that I often do, here's our finished top. So I just wanted to jump on and just show you how that looked with the pattern alterations and made up in the correct fabric, or the fabric from the kit, in order that you can have a look and see if you think that's the kind of top and the finish that you want to create for yours, and therefore it's worth your while stitching along with me. So I hope you think it is, and I'll carry on with the tutorial now. Okay, so I've got my needle cord here, and I don't know if you can see, but it's got these very fine lines in it. Maybe the camera will pick it up, maybe it won't on the right side. They are very fine. But it also does tend to pick up fluff and dust, so just be aware of that as well. And that's because corduroy has something called a nap. So it's N-A-P, I'll put it up here for you so you can see that. And what that means is that one way when you put your hand on the fabric will feel lovely and smooth and soft, but if you then pull your hand the other way, you lift up the pile on that fabric and it feels rough. So there's resistance to your hand going one way and lovely and smooth the other way. And what can happen is if you don't cut all your pattern pieces out the same way, in the same direction, you'll have sometimes that shading can affect the colour of the fabric, and I have seen before fabrics can be a couple of shades different depending on the direction that you use to cut your pattern pieces out. It doesn't matter necessarily, unless you've got a strong preference, which way round you have the nap, whether you have the rough, if you pull your hand towards you it's rough, or whether you push your hand away it's smooth. That doesn't really matter so much. My preference is to have it smooth when you run your hand down the garment. So I'm just going to turn my fabric round so that when I run my hand down it towards me, if you think from neck down to hem, then that's going to make that lovely and smooth. As I say, the choice is yours as to which way round you want it to be. We've also got inside the book a cutting out guide here to make sure that you can get enough fabric out of you can cut it out of your fabric. Now, because I've changed the pattern for mine, I'm going to change the cutout layout for mine. But for you, if you're just making this for your Luna Lapin and you're using the unaltered pattern, then you're going to first fold over one edge, and I'll use my pattern pieces for example, but obviously you know that they're slightly different. And then we're going to put the front on this section just here, and if I take it to that original folded line, then you'll be able to see where that is. And what we need to do is, when we've roughly got the width that we need to have, we need to make sure that this fabric is straight. One way we can do that with corduroy is we can have a look on the back of the fabric and you can see the lines going down. I've got my right sides together at the moment. And then you can alter that fabric so that you can follow one line all the way up and all the way down. The other way that you can do it is if you've got a selvage edge, which is what I've got, which is this bound edge on the edge there. Can you see that changing colour? There's a little bit of fraying there, but that's the manufacturing. And this is the direction the fabric was put on the roller when it was manufactured. So if I just move that down again, the other way to say you've got straight of grain on corduroy fabric is to measure. So what we would do is we'd find the line where I can see where the changes colour just here, and I would measure from there to the edge. So we're 3 inches, 3.3 inches and 1/8 of an inch or 2/8 of an inch, and then go down to the bottom here, and I can see we're 3 1/8 of an inch, so I know that we're not quite straight there, so I can just lift up one corner, lift up that edge slightly, and that then should, once I smooth that down, the two measurements should be the same from your measuring point. And then you will know that when you put your pattern piece on here, that it is on straight of grain. And when you're working with either stripes or you're working with a fabric here which has got these the pile of the fabric with those lines in it, we want that to run straight down the body. We don't want it to be off at an angle at all. So that's why we're taking the trouble to do that. So with your front, you're going to put that on. I'll put it onto the original line, and then you can then put it on. Make sure that your fold line is directly onto the edge of the fabric. Don't have any extra on the edge here, and make sure it fits. Mine doesn't, because I'm going to do an altered one, but yours will do. And then what we're going to do then is we're going to fold over this in section here enough so that we can fit on our back pattern piece, and you can fit your sleeve in at the bottom down here as well, which will then give you enough fabric. We're going to measure that, make sure that's nice and straight as well. And the same with the sleeve. We can use the grain line on the sleeve to make sure that's straight by measuring from the edge of the fabric where we've straightened it up to the line, and that will then at the top and at the bottom, and that again will make sure we've not got our pattern piece twisted at all. But on the collar piece, you've got this line here, which is called a bias line, because if you think about the straight line at the top and the straight line at the bottom, this one here is at 45 degrees angle. Hopefully you can see it just there, look. And so what that means is that that line there has to be straight of grain, and in order to find that, you'll place it on your fabric, and then you will again measure from the top of that line to the edge of your fabric, and from the bottom of the line to the edge of your fabric, and the two measurements should be the same. Once you've got that nailed, and that's right, you're going to pin that down, but you're going to cut out your back and your sleeve and your front, and then this little bit here which is folded over, you're going to fold that back, so you're just cutting out the collar on one piece of fabric. Can you see how I've just folded this out of the way? That was folded up there to give us the halfway, and I've folded that out before I cut it out. Otherwise you'll be cutting out, because you need one of the collar, and we need one of the front on the back cut on the fold, one of the front cut on the fold, but we need two sleeves. That's why that's on there. Okay, you don't need to cut out the stitching guide, that's just a guide for stitching, so you don't need to cut that piece out of your fabric. You just need these four pieces: back, front, sleeve and your collar. If you are following along with me and you've made changes to your pattern, then we're just going to change the way slightly that we cut this out. So if you're making it just as the original pattern, you can jump ahead now to where we actually start the sewing. So I am still going to use my half pattern here, and I'm going to make sure that is on there, and we're going to put this so that this is the right width. You haven't got any real room for manoeuvre on this, so you've got to be nice and tight to that selvage edge. So just like that. Now let me just measure it, just make sure that we're straight. So that's just under 4, and that's on 4, so I know that that's not quite straight. And squaring up things, it seems like a bit of a nuisance, but if you can just get into the habit of doing it, it'll make a real big difference to your garment. I've gone too far now. It just helps stop things from twisting when you're cutting them out. Yeah, that's perfect now. So that's going to go on there. Let's just put a pin in at the top and the bottom in order just to anchor that down for me so that I know where that is. Okay, so that's that one. Then I'm going to come over to this section here, and I'm only going to fold it over enough that the back will fit on. So let me just fold this across, and I'm going to measure this fold from here to the selvage edge here. I can't measure it to the cut edge there because I don't know that cut edge is straight. That's the way that it was delivered to me. So we're just over 19.5 there. And we're way over there. So let me just see how much we've got, because we need to keep this as tight as possible. So I need to go in at the top here. If you already know about lining up your fabric, then you can jump ahead, obviously. So that's to there. That's to there, right, that's straight now. So again, I'm going to pop that on, and I'm going to make sure the neck point is on, and I'm going to make sure that that bottom hem is on. I have got a little bit of folding over on the edge of mine, and you might well have the same, but we just need to get it as close as we can do. So let's do a little top and bottom there as well. Then what we're going to be doing is I'm going to cut out 2 sleeves. I'm going to cut out one here and one here. Now you could fold your fabric if you wanted to in half once you've cut these 2 pieces out, but just for now let's just pop that on the bottom there. And we want our grain line here to be straight. So what I generally do there is put a pin in at the top, and then I measure, and that gives me a line to measure to the end, to there. And then at the bottom, do it again. Yeah, that's straight. Okay, that's fine, so we can pin that in. And what you need to make sure is that when you're pinning it down, you don't have one front this way round and then your back the upside down. Otherwise, you're going to end up with that difference in the shading. The same with the sleeves. You can't have a hem down here and then turn it round so the other hem is at the top here and the curves down here. You need all of those pattern pieces lying north to south as they're worn from the head to the hem in order to make that work. The other thing that we can't do on here very easily, oh, can we? Oh, we might. No, we can't, because we've got to have the sleeve here. So because we need to cut out our other sleeve, and that's on the single at the moment, as this one will be, we have to cut our collar out just on the straight of grain. So ignore your bias mark at the 45-degree angle and instead just line it up so that it's lying straight on your fabric with the sort of straight north to south, and then we can then pin that on as well in order to use that. And again, we can just make sure this is straight by measuring out to the end at the top and again at the bottom, and then once that's straight, then we can then pin it down and we're good to go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just put the extra pins in now and then cut out my fabric. But you might have to what I'm trying to say is you might have to jiggle around with the layout other than the way it is in the book in order to make sure that it fits. And because we've now got plenty of room in this collar, it makes no difference whether it's cut on the bias or not. And even though it was cut on the bias before, it didn't make any difference to the fact that it wouldn't fit. So, you know, I believe you can cut that out on straight of grain with full confidence, and you should be fine with that when we come to sewing it. And if not, I'll pop a note up here, but if you don't see a note, it means that everything was fine and everything's worked really nicely, as I suspect it will do. Okay, I'll come back to you once I've cut all this out. Okay, so I've got all of my 4 pattern pieces cut out. I've got my front, my sleeve, my back, and I've got my cowl neck as well from there. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to now put little snips in the fabric. Oh. And what we're going to do is we're going to look on the side seams for where there are the notches. Now, when you've got things on the fold, be really careful that you know where your folded edge is, because we don't ever do a little snip into the folded edge. We're only going to do a snip on this cut edge here where you can see you've got 2 layers. Because if you put a snip on this edge here, you're going to actually snip into your fabric and you're going to make a hole in it, and we don't want that. We just want a couple of millimetre snip putting on top of the notch in order that when we open it out we can see that little snip, and that will give us that mark that we need. So now I'm doing that top and bottom on those 2 dotted lines, but as I say, I'm not doing it on the front here. What I am going to do is just on the neckline where the folded line is, because it's a cut edge, I can then just put a little snip in there just to mark that centre front. But certainly down this edge here, which is the folded edge there, you don't want any snips in there at all. Okay, that's fine. So let's have a look at the back now. We've got 2 notches on the back just here as well. So let's just snip into those on that side seam. Again, nothing on that centre seam. So nothing in the centre of that centre seam, but where the top of the neckline is to mark the centre back, I'm just going to do a little snip, and that will help us later when we're placing the collar. On the sleeve here, we've got our centre notch, and if you've not altered your pattern, you'll have a notch there. If you've added ½ an inch like I have to make your garment for Ottoline, you'll need to imagine your notch is halfway between those 2 points. So 1/4 inch in the middle of that altered edge there, and that will give you a little snip there. And then on our collar, we have to, if you've altered your pattern, you need to ignore the existing notch that there is, and you need to make your own. And the way that you do that is fold your pattern piece, let's go that way, fold your pattern piece in half. Exactly, so cut edge to cut edge along those short sides, and then you can just do a little notch on this side, top and bottom, and that will just help us when we're placing that. Okay, so that's all of our notches sorted. So next you want to get your thread, match your thread as best as you can do. If you haven't got a direct match, the best one to use is one slightly darker rather than slightly lighter, unless you want your stitching to stand out and be a bit more sort of feature stitching, like top stitching. And then we'll get our machine lined up, and then we'll be all good to start sewing. Okay, so I've got my machine set up. I've got a dusky pink colour thread in mind, because that's going to show up the stitching for you so that you can see how that's looking, and it'll be easier for you to pick out. But I have put in Smetch Microtex needles, and those are my favourite ones to use. So this one is a Microtex, which is a very, very sharp point, and I use that 90% of the time. And then it's a size 80 is this one, but you could also use a 70 as well. That would also be very good one to use, but you can get those from most of your local needlework shops or online. Okay, so let me get on with our stitching. So the first thing we're going to do is take out our pins from our back and our front, and then we're going to match those up at the shoulders. So let's get our back out first. Just keep your pattern pieces to one side so you know where they are, because you don't want to lose those if you can help it, especially if you have made all of those alterations. And I've laid my back out so that the right side is up, and I'm going to lay my front so that the right side is down. So that's the fluffy side of the corduroy is down, and then I'm just going to match up these corner shoulders. Now I'm just putting one pin in because they are quite narrow, and this fabric does have a tendency to stick to itself. You'll see what I mean when you start working with it. And so one pin is fine. Normally I wouldn't advocate for having only one pin on a seam because it can twist if it's slippy, but on this fabric you'll be fine. Okay, so we're going to just sew across these shoulder seams here, as you can see there where I've matched them up together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Let's do that. And I'm just using a 2.2 construction stitch, but you could go down to a 2 if you wanted. And I'm going to reverse at the start and reverse at the end. That'll work. And then we're going to then take off our starting and our stopping thread. So there, hopefully you can see the thread that I've used there, look. So I'm just going to do the other one as well. Same seam allowance. Oh, a bit too speedy, Claire. Take our pins out and reverse at the end. Such a short seam, aren't they, those little shoulder ones? And there we go, that one's just folded back slightly, but I can smooth it down with my nail. So that's what we've got. So that's all we're going to do just for the moment. Just pop your sewing machine out of the way because you're going to need your iron next. So we're going to take our collar. And before we can sew the collar together, we need to just put a memory mark in it. So what we're going to do is we are going to take our pattern piece off, right side out, and then we're going to fold it over so that along the short side, so that we've got the long sides together. And it should lie directly on top of each other, and then we're going to crease that. So you can either crease it with your fingers, which might be enough, so that does hold a nice crease, as you can see, so it might be enough just to do it with your fingers, or get your iron out and just press that in half that way first before you work any further. Okay, once we've done that, we are then going to open it out and put the two short ends together with the right sides on the inside, and then we're going to sew down this line here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Put pins in if you need to, but as I say, corduroy fabric does hold on to itself, so it's quite useful too if you don't want to have any pins. Reverse at the start and the stop. And there we go. Okay. That's giving us our seam there, and then we're going to just finger press that open. So just go inside the actual roll of the collar, go to your collar, and just use your fingernails and your fingers just to smooth that down, that seam allowance. And then when you've done that, you're going to then fold that in half so that the seam allowances are on the inside. So just match that up perfectly and fold it in half. Oops. And you want your raw edges all together all the way round. And then what I'm going to suggest that we do is just put a quick holding stitch either by hand or by machine into this, just to hold those two raw edges together. It'll make it much easier for handling when you're actually trying to insert it into your top. So just put a couple of pins around just to hold those raw edges together, and then starting at the back seam and just going 1/8 inch in from the edge. I'm not doing the full 1/4 inch, it's not a construction stitch. We're just going to go right on that very edge, and just using a little stitch, we're just going to sew that round. Put your needle in the work, so if you've got a needle up down button, use that, because that'll hold everything still for you. When you've sewn a bit, just roll it forward towards you, and then you'll be able to just keep right on that edge. Take your pins out as you go. We don't sew over pins, so it's not good for our machines. I've not reversed at the start and stop because it's just a holding stitch. This one is. And there we go, so just 1/8 inch in from the edge. So we've got our folded edge here now, and then that's our raw edges just put together there. So the next thing that we're going to do now is we are going to open out our shoulders, and we can just finger press those seams open as well. So just use your fingers just to smooth that. And this is the good thing with woven fabric, it will hold it. If you're using a stretch fabric, you might have to just press that, because it probably won't, it'll keep springing back for you, but on a woven fabric, as you can see, a cotton, it'll hold it for you. And then we're going to locate which is the front and the back. So the back is always higher and the front is lower here. So at that centre back point, you're going to find your seam that sews your collar into a circle, and we're just going to put the collar against it. And we're having both sides of the collar, the right or the wrong side, but we're pinning so that we've got the right side out. Sorry, the wrong side out on our top itself. Just make sure you go through all the layers at the point that you're going to be pinning it. You don't want to miss any bits. And then what I want you to do is go to the other side, the halfway point that you did on the collar, and that's going to match against your centre front. So you can put that notch on top of it itself as well, and then that will line that up for you. And now, if we tuck that collar inside, the collar should fit perfectly along the inside edge of your neckline. If it doesn't, it just means that you've not taken enough seam allowance when you've done your join and your collar. So all you need to do then is just unpick a bit of your holding stitches to expose that seam and just take it in slightly, or if your collar is too short, then take those stitches out and expand it, just make a smaller seam allowance, and that will help it to fit for you. You've got a bias edge on here, so just smooth things out in order just to fit. Keep your seam allowances open on your shoulders, because that will help remove bulk on these small garments, and everything should just sit just nicely for you. Just put in several pins around, and I think what we're going to do is I'm going to suggest that you tack this before you sew it, because it'll make it much easier for you to handle. If you're experienced at sewing these sorts of things, you may not need to tack, but if you're a beginner, I would definitely recommend that you do, and I'm going to do that with you so that you can see that it does help get a great finish. So on the top of the shoulders, just keep your seam allowances open and just make sure that neckline folds onto there. Just it sits nicely. So there we go, there's all of our pins all sticking up, and you can see why they might be difficult to navigate in the machine, especially if it's a smaller version. So what we're going to do is we're going to get some thread. I've got some nice burgundy here, you'll be able to see that. Only needs to be single layer. I'll just take some of that off and have a needle. Thread it onto the needle. Apologies if you can hear some strange noise in the background. I live in an apartment, and so I think somebody upstairs is doing some DIY. And obviously they don't know that I'm trying to film, so we have to just show a bit of tolerance, but apologies if you can hear that. Okay, so knot in the end of the thread. Just find a place to start, it doesn't matter where, and then slightly less than your 1/4 inch seam allowance, I would suggest. We're going to just start and take some stitches in here just to put that together. You don't want any bunching up on your stitches, you're not trying to cinch that fabric in, you're just trying to hold it together whilst you take it to the sewing machine to sew it. As you go, you can take your pins out. It's less to navigate for you, just make sure that's all sitting nice and flat. Take particular care where you're going over the shoulders, so if you can manage to keep your shoulder seams flat, that will help. Oh, I was going slightly wider than my 1/4 inch there. Folded back, and you're just going to just tack with big running stitches all the way around. Let me just show you how big my stitches are, and then you'll know. Yep, you can see like that, and that's going to hold that collar in place for you without you needing to have the pins, and then that way you won't stab yourself quite so much with the pins, which can be very uncomfortable, can't it? Again, special attention over the shoulders just to make sure that fabric's sitting nice and flat. And you can generally feel it with your fingers, you can feel if it's puckering up or if there's any problems underneath. So back to where the knot is, and then we'll just do a double stitch where that knot is, and that will hold that steady for us. So cut our thread, needle away, take our pins out, and I'll move those pins in a second, but you can see that that collar now is holding on there nicely without any pins. You can see some little rough undulations in the collar on the outside here, but when I go to it and I press it out with my fingers, you can see that's all lying nice and flat. So just check that you've not tacked in any puckers, because that will not help when you're then going to sew this otherwise. Okay, let me just get the sewing machine ready and we'll start and sew this collar in. Okay, so back at our machine again, we've got it on our straight stitch, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my needle across to the left. So I've got a button on mine of stitch position which moves the needle correctly across all the way to the left, and that means that there's only going to be a small amount of the presser foot. So if I just bring this up to you here and show you, use these scissors, you know you've got your little bit in the middle of your presser foot here where your needle goes through. Normally when we sew it's right in the middle. I've moved my needle across to this left hand side because I want to have only a small amount of this presser foot here on this. If you try and sew this collar on with your needle in the middle position, the fabric will bunch up much more because it's trying to feed it through straight, and when you're going over these shoulders we've got to manipulate the fabric around. I'll show you what I mean. It'll hopefully all make sense, but if you have got the ability to move your needle, and it's worth getting your instruction book out to learn how to move your needle position, because I do change mine quite a lot, then that will also help you. So I'm going to just start on, I think I'm going to start on a shoulder, top of a shoulder, because that's one of the more difficult places to start. And we are going to be taking 1/4 inch seam allowance here, so that's where we need to be starting. And we're going to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back just to anchor that in. And then when we've taken a few stitches, we're then going to adjust our, so our needle goes into the work, because then we can lift up our presser foot, move our garment, but it's anchored by the needle going through it. And that is what we want while we're sewing. Some machines have this ability to have a automatic, so that every time you stop sewing, your needle is pressed down into your work until you finish your seam. But if not, just use your hand crank on the side here, your button here, and that will, every time you stop, and just put your needle into your work, and it'll make a big difference with how you actually sew. So we're going to carry on now. So we're going to feel with our fingers, and we can feel for the few centimetres in front of our collar here, and we can make sure that that's feeling flat. Mine is. So now I'm going to sew a few more stitches. And as you can see, the needle stays in the work. I'm then going to roll the top towards me because it's on a circle. So I'm going to roll the top towards me, and I'm going to sew another couple of inches. Then when it's getting bunched up underneath the needle, I'm then going to roll the fabric again forward so that the bit that I'm sewing is always straight and flat, and I can feel that with my finger before I start to sew it. Okay, and then roll again. So we're coming over the next shoulder as well here. So let's just make sure there's no puckers underneath there. Apologies if my hands are in the way. And then again, I've stopped and I've rolled forward. And then I've stopped, I'm rolling forward. And you're going to look for where your stitches are, where you originally started. And then we're going to then go to that point. I can find my threads there. And I'm going to keep sewing just nice and steadily until we get to that point. I'm going to reverse at that point there. Needle out of the work. Set our snips and take off our starting and finishing threads, and we'll have a little look at what we've got. So let's have a look on the right side, and what we're looking for is we want this collar to be sewn in lovely and flat and not to have any puckers anywhere along that seam, and you'll see a little pucker because there'll be a little crease that's been pressed into it. And luckily I've not got any puckers at all on mine. If you have, go back inside to your stitches. Where the pucker is, undo that stitch directly on top of it. If you've got a quick unpick, like one of these are really, really handy, and generally you get one with your machine as well, so one of those. And what we do is we undo the stitch directly on top of the pucker, and then 3 or 4 stitches either side. And then what you should be able to do with your fingers is you should be able to then flatten down those fibres, and then you should be able to rejoin, so over stitch a couple of stitches back over the bit you've just undone and finish off after it, and that will seal that down for you. If you can't press the fibres flat with your fingers, it means you've got to undo a few more stitches either side. So just do that until you can lay that fabric down flat and then put it in your machine and sew it again. You don't have to undo the whole thing and redo the whole thing. We're also going to neaten this as we go, and although I didn't neaten the shoulder seams, they're so short, I don't think that matters so much. But we are going to neaten this because look how this fabric is fraying. So I'm going to choose a zigzag stitch on my machine, which is number 8 on mine. I'm going to take the width down to a 3.5, so that's the depth of the V, and then I'm going to take my stitch length down to a 1.5 just to keep it nice and narrow. Where I started on the top of my shoulder, I'm going to start with my zigzag there. And I'm just going to go around the edge of this collar now that we know there's no puckers. Obviously, if you've got puckers, you've got to put those right first before you zigzag. And then we're just going to go ahead and just stitch along this edge and just neaten it off. You're only doing in the seam allowance, you're not going across into where you've already stitched with your collar. And looking at it now, I should have taken out my tacking stitches, which I've not done. But if I've caught you in time, take out your tacking stitches first. I'll take mine out afterwards. So again, just using that same technique, sew a bit, roll it, sew a bit, roll it. just overlap the stitches slightly, and that will be enough just to hold it. So let's take off our starting and stopping threads again, so keep that all nice and neat. And then have a little look for any whiskers like this where they're just sticking up, because all we're going to do now is very carefully just go around and just take off those whiskers, making sure not to cut through any of the stitches that we've just, the zigzag stitch we've just put in. And that's just going to neaten that edge so it doesn't fray. Obviously if you've got an overlocker you can use that, but sometimes these smaller garments are a bit fiddly for that. Otherwise you might have an overlock stitch on your sewing machine. Feel free to use that. Whatever you like to do to neaten your edges is fine by me. And if you're making this by hand, because some people do like to do them by hand, you can just do a little overstitch over the edge of the cut edges by hand, and that will also neaten this up as well. Okay, so now I am going to take out my tack-in stitches, but if you, hopefully I caught you in time and you've already taken yours out. Because if I switch to my quick unpick and just take out the stitches that will come away easily. If you get somewhere where it won't pull out, then just leave it. So I've got a bit here, look, where it's got caught with the machine. And what we do there is we determine that we can't pull that out. So I'm going to snip that off close to where the actual stitching is. And then if you pull on the other side, or where it's gone through, generally speaking, you can then pull that out. It's got caught on both sides, look. You can pull those fibres out. But it's just better than trying to yank at it and it not moving. So again here, so let's just snip that off close to the edge. Oops. And then that should just then pull straight out. And we've got some more on here. I did go through it well, didn't I? So when you've finished, you'll have a nicely sewn and neatened neckline like that. Okay, so once we've got our bits of thread into the bin, what we're going to do next is we're just going to turn up these hems, because I should have pressed that first and I haven't done. But while you're on your zigzag stitch, let's just go ahead, let's find our front. So we know our back now because we've got the join for our collar. So let's just go to our front and let's just zigzag neatly across the end here, because that needs a zigzagged edge. I'm going to do slightly wider zigzag on this one, so I'm going to use a size 4 stitch V on this one, but I've still got the 1.5 length because this fabric does like to fray a lot. Didn't reverse at the start and the stop, but just to take that along because the edges will be caught up in the side seams eventually. So just put a little zigzag stitch on the end there. And again, I'm just going to take off any little whiskers that we might have sticking out just to neaten that up. Again, it's just taking pride in our work and making sure that's all lovely and neat. And just to say, all of the skills that you're learning here are directly transferable to adult and children's clothing as well. So if you can make this little top for Luna, you could make a little top for a child or a top for yourself. It's just knowing the steps that are necessary. So we have zigzagged across that edge, and then we are going to press it up 1 centimetre to the wrong side. So let me just get my iron and my ironing board and I'll be back to you. I don't know if you've used a wool pressing mat before. This one's 12 inches by 12 inches, but they're really quite useful. Nice for just these small kind of stitching projects. The other thing that's good with them as well is that you can pin straight into them. So like with this top now, where we've got to turn it up by 1 centimetre, I can use my seam gauge again. I can find my 1 centimetre mark, and then I can put a pin in to hold that in place. Let's go across to this edge here. Measure 1 centimetre. Pin that in place, and then again to this edge just here, need 1 centimetre, and then you guessed it, we're going to put a pin in there as well. And I can put, now that we've got the edges down, I can just put one in the middle just to hold it flat for me to make sure. Just double check it if you want to. Make sure that you're comfortable with all of that. That one's slightly over. But it just holds it flat for you, so you don't then burn your fingers. And if you're sewing with children, that's really quite a useful thing to do. So we're just going to press that now with our sewing machine. You can use a press cloth if you want to as well. But just for now, let's just press that, working on the wrong side, so I don't mind so much. And then once you've got that in place, you can take the pins out, and if you need to, you can then just press where those pins have been, just to make sure that it's actually going to hold. So that's that one done. Okay, so we've got the bottom edge just down, folded over by the 1 centimetre. Then you're going to look on your side seams and find your notches, and then you're going to fold that pocket up until you've got to your side, until you've got to the notch. So the notch is right on that bottom, and then you're going to put your pin in again to hold it, and do that on both sides. And then while we're at it, let's put it on the middle. And then because we're working on the top of the fabric, I'm going to use a press cloth. And then the press cloth that I use is silk organza, which is this, so you can see through it. You can get silk organza online. It is real silk, but it's really great because you can see through it whilst you're making your creases, especially when you're working on the right side of a garment. But what it means is that it won't actually damage, the heat of the iron doesn't damage and make the front of your fabric shiny. So once you've pressed that, take those pins out, and then we're going to turn it over. Okay, so this is just taking some sorting out. So we folded over the 1 centimetre, and we've kept that folded over whilst we then turned up and put we've got the wrong side facing up at the moment, and we then pressed a line on the side notches, the first ones. We're then going to turn the whole thing over, so you've now got your right side up, and you've got that folded line at the bottom here. So if I unfold this all the way, you'll be able to see where those different creases are to get your bearings. So there's the 1 centimetre hem, and there's the line of the first notch. So let's fold that centimetre hem underneath again, and then this folded edge here that we've for the line is going to be taken up until it matches the second notch, or the higher notch on the side hem. And when you place that folded edge up against the notch, you shouldn't be able to see any of the folded hem down the bottom, so just sort of adjust it until you've got that in place. Pop a couple of pins across in order just to make sure that that's in the right place, like that. And then we're pressing, but we're actually pressing this bottom fold here, not the top one. So let's just lift that up and just press that in place. Just be careful not to drag your fabric and distort it. So we're almost doing like a concertina shape, aren't we? So you can see my pins there holding it up to the second one, and if I open that up, you can see where that hem is tucked underneath. So now what I've done is I've opened out that hem, and the hem is actually encasing the bottom fold of that pocket, and that's what gives you a nice finish on the end there. Let me hold this up to the camera so you can see. If you follow it step by step, it's not so, it's fairly straightforward. So we've got a first fold over at the 1 centimetre seam bottom of the edge after we've zigzagged it. We've got a folded line where the fold is on the right side of the fabric at the bottom notch, and then we've got a fold where the fold is to the wrong side of the fabric on the top notch. And then when we fold these over each other, we're going to fold out the hem, so that when we put this down, the hem is actually going to go over the top of the folded edge at the bottom there, just to sort of hold that in place. And then when you look at it from the top, you've got a folded edge here. I hope that all makes sense to you. If I just hold it for a little bit longer for you to get your bearings. So there's 1 centimetre, fold on the top there, and then when I turn this over, you can see on the edge there where we've got all the edges, but this hem at the bottom here is going to go over the bottom of that fold in order to encase it. So can you see it on the inside there, look? So hopefully that all makes sense. And that's going to hold it in place. If you need to just give it another press, then you can do. So that's all sitting all nicely on the front there. It looks very short, a short bodice, but that's okay. Let me just give mine another press because I've been opening and closing it, and I want it to hold nice and still for me whilst we're sewing it. Then the next thing you're going to do is take your pocket guide, which is this one here, and we're going to put that over the top of the folded edge. So the bottom edge of the, so can you see how the shaded edge here is open, there's no line, and there's a line at the bottom of the shaded edge just there. Just show you like that. So here is open, so you've got shaded, shaded and shaded. If you find those on yours, you've got the line that joins it all together at the bottom, and there's no line here. So the lines where you've got the line at the bottom in between there is going to go against the bottom edge of your top. So make sure you've got your edges on. My pattern overlaps slightly, so just make sure it's as central as it can be. And the bottom line for your pockets wants to be on the bottom line of your, on the folded edge, that hem edge of your top. I'll show you in a second. I'll lift it up and show you. So let's pin that in place like that to start off with, and then I'm also going to put a pin in each shaded place as well. That's slightly off at the bottom there. Come on Claire, get it lined up. Just make sure that's... And the shaded area on your stitching guide is going to be slightly shorter than the depth of the fold that you're attaching it to. Just make sure that hem stays underneath as it needs to. And I'm putting a pin inside each shaded area as well, just to hold that still. So that's how that looks, because if you practice now, there's a pocket in there and there's a pocket in there, because we're going to stitch on this solid line just here. So remove my ironing board for me. That's it. So that's how yours should look. So when you look at it from the inside, you're going to see a folded edge just there, and just make sure that your drawn line for the top of this shaded area is going to hold down part of that pocket. Can you see on there? Hopefully that makes sense to you. And then you should have some open bits, which are going to be your actual pockets themselves. And I'm going to sew directly through the paper, and you'll see how we make that work in a minute. So let's start from one side here. I'm going to sew from off the edge. When I've got to follow a line closely, I find that if I'm in the middle of my presser foot with my needle, I've got too much room for variation and for wobbling. So I tend to move my needle across to the very left or to the very right, in this case to the very left, and then I can follow that line directly, and I've got less room to wiggle with, and that does seem to give me a better finish, and I hope it does for you too. So we're on a straight stitch now, so a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back. Let me take my stitch speed down just so that I can go nice and slowly, and then I'm going to put my needle in my work as well so I can stop and I can be hands-free. So I'm going to then, because I've started this off now, the paper's now anchored, I'm going to take the first pin out and I'm going to sew along on top of that drawn line. This will test how nice and neat my lines are, won't it? Until I get to the, on top of the line going the other direction at 90 degrees. And I'm going to leave my needle in the work, lift up my presser foot, and I'm going to twist my top now. And then I'm going to sew down this line just here. Take it nice and steady. And I want to make sure that I'm just on the edge of the fabric fold at the very bottom. Then I'm going to twist it do the same thing, it's called pivoting. I'm going to pivot at the end there so I catch the edge of this fold, and I'm going to sew along the edge here. And I'm going slightly higher than my line because otherwise I'd be off the bottom of my fold. So I get to the end. I'm going to leave my needle in the work and I'm going to pivot. Now I can take this next pin out because that's going to be in my way. And I can take that pin out because it's all being held tight now. And then I'm going to sew up this line just here now. There or thereabouts. And stop at the top. One more stitch and then pivot again to come across. And let's sew across the top just here. Then I'm going to pivot again to come down. So we're just following those lines towards around the design of that pattern, but make sure you stay on the folded edge because we need to catch that fabric on that bottom edge. I'm just going to move this pin because I know it's going to be in my way, so let me just move it that way. Okay. Make sure that the fabric's all nice and flat still. And sew across. So get to the line. That's it, and then change direction again. And sewing through the paper is really easy. There's a type of quilting called foundation paper piecing where you always sew through paper in order to sew your fabric on. So it is a tried and tested method, and you can just reverse at the end if you want to. And then needle out of the work, take that last pin out, and then take those stitches off, that thread off. So we can see we've sewn through there. You can see a couple of places where I'm not quite onto my fabric, but I just wanted to make sure that I caught the bottom of this, bottom of the folded edge. So I needed to make sure that was covered over, and I've managed to catch some thread inside my stitches. So let me just trim that off. And all we need to do then is we just need to tear off the fabric away from the stitches, and because we've done the stitches quite nicely and they're quite small, then that should tear off. I didn't want to go any smaller than a 2.2 because I wanted it to be a decorative stitch, and I didn't want it to come and, you know, to be too tiny. So then that should fall away. If your paper isn't pulling away very well and you've got a little jug of water or something nearby, just dip your finger in and just run the water along the seam where you've sewn, and that water will tear the paper will tear away even more easily than it was doing originally. So again, you've just got to go back and just pick out those little bits, but you'll get a nice seam edge, and it's taken away the risk of your marking pen or pencil or chalk not coming out of your fabric. So I'm just going to carry on now, just take out off the rest of this paper. As you can see, it doesn't take very long to do. Just make sure that's all coming out. And we've got two lovely pockets on the front of our fisherman's top here. It's a bit like an artist's smock as well, I think, isn't it, to some extent as well. You can also use the nose of a quick unpick if you need to, just to ease that paper out. Just make sure you don't undo any stitches, because we don't want to be undoing the stitches at all. And that's why I say you will need to trace off a paper guide, a stitching guide each time you make the top if you use this method. But if you've kept your master copy intact that we copied off, if you did make alterations to your pattern, or just trace it out of your book again, it's not really a lot of trouble, is it, to go to in order to get such a nice stitching line. Okay, just tidying mine up a smidge. Get rid of my massive bits of paper. And there we go, let me just show you that. So we've got this lovely pocket on there. And if yours will be neater, I can see mine's gone slightly up at the sides, but the centre one's okay. And there's where you can put your finger in for your character can have their pockets, and this bit in the middle is joined. Okay, so I hope that's demystified the pocket for you, and I hope you're happy with the result that you've got. What we're going to do next is we are going to put our sleeves in, I think, and that would be a good point to do next. So let's get on and put our sleeves in. First thing we're going to do is take our pins out of our sleeves. Just going to make sure that we have already marked our centre point on our shoulder point there, and we have done. So just put the pattern piece to one side. First thing we're going to do is just neaten off these edges. So we're going to turn it over. Let me just have a quick look and see how much Sarah's allowed. 1/2 centimetre, turn it up, and then by a further 1 centimetre and sew. Okay, so let's get our ironing board back again. We're going to have the wrong side facing up, and using our seam gauge we're going to turn it over by 1/2 centimetre first. Let's put our pins in, especially on these smaller hems. You can see, and you can also pin into an ordinary ironing board if it's fabric covered as well. So that's just something just to remember. It can help you somewhat. And then we're going to turn it over by 1 centimetre, I believe. Yes, by 1 centimetre. So it's a total hem of 1.5 centimetres. It'll give you a nice little edge on there without any fraying going out. So just put a pin in there. and then down to this side. And then we're going to repeat the same on the second one as well. Now at the moment I'm not going to, it depends whether you want to or not. I like to do my hems after I've sewn the side seam. So I'm going to press it to put the memory in, but then I'm going to leave this to actually sew it afterwards. I'm going to put a note on the screen if it's not possible to sew it in the round when it's on the machine, because you'll have to be careful with it, and it might well be easier to do it now. But if you do it now, you're going to end up with raw edges showing on that edge. And I try to get a nice neat finish if I can do. So let me just iron this one and then I'll come back to you. You don't need to watch me do that. Okay, so you'll have 2 sleeves with the sleeves folded over, so the inside edge has been folded in. If you want to, you can just go ahead and just run a row of stitches. I would sew it from this side, a row of stitches close to the edge there, and just hold that still. I'm going to try and do mine after, but it will be quite fiddly. It'll be neater. Okay, I'm going to do mine after, but you might want to do yours now. Okay, regardless of which way round you finish your hem off, we're then going to attach the sleeves into our top. So let's just take one at a time, and we're going to first start with the notch on the top of the shoulder. We're going to turn it over so that it's right sides facing, and we're going to match that notch with our shoulder seam. So match that on top of there and put a pin in to hold it. And I pin into the garment like this, because you take too much room if you go across on these small things. I'm then going to take this bottom edge here on the sleeve, the bottom edge of the curved edge here, and I'm going to pull it round so that it sits straight down, and that curve matches perfectly with the bottom, with the side seam. And then let's do that same thing on the other side as well. So open out your top, find that underarm point on the bottom of the sleeve and on the top, and then you're going to put another pin in to hold that in place. Then we're going to then go halfway along the edge of the sleeve, and we are going to split the difference. So we can see that this sleeve edge here is longer and that's shorter. So we're going to go about halfway between the two, match them up so we've got the same amount of extra fabric one side as the other, and then we're going to put a pin in the middle. You can also put a row of tacking stitches in as well to hold when you're doing this, but if you're careful with your fabric, because this is a bias edge, so it's cut on the bias on that shoulder point, these fibres should smooth down so that when you hold them with your fingers, you can actually at that 1/4 inch point, they will sort of lie flat and on top of each other. So let's put another pin in just there, hold that, and let's do the same thing here going over the top of the shoulder. So we can see we've got extra fabric here and a straight edge there, but again, just by putting your finger on, it does smooth everything down and hold it still. I would suggest that we tack these in place again. So let's do the other side. So again, we can see we've got a much longer edge here than we have here, but just find a rough middle of that long edge on the sleeve and match it to the rough centre edge of the arm side, armhole, arm side, whatever you want to call it, and that will give you 2 bits then. So we've split that between the 2, look, so we've got 2 on the edges there, and then we're going to use our fingers and the heat and just manipulating that fabric so it just sits flat, and it will sit down nicely. Obviously you've got stretch fabric, it's not a problem, but on this one it's not. So, and then we're then smoothing it down. And what you're looking to do is to pin it so that you've not got a pucker in the outside edge of your fabric for your top, so there's no puckers pinned in there at all. And then on your sleeve you've got no puckers. Let's just take a piece of tacking thread again. That's going to be long enough, and I've just dropped something. Put a knot in the end there, and again we are going to just do some running stitches round about where the 1/4 inch seam allowance is, because that's where it's going to sit best for us. And you can try and skip the tacking if you want to, but sometimes when you try and do that, it does mean you end up spending a little bit more time unpicking and just putting things right. So sometimes it's a good idea just to take that time out. Just make sure your raw edges are together. It's very narrow over the top of that shoulder seam, but we can do it. keep checking we've not tacked anything in there. Pins in the ironing board just to hold that still. Yep, that's all fine. Oops, that was my finger. To make sure everything's all lined straight, and then just a double stitch at the end. And then we can then put our threads. Take these pins out. So there we go. So we can see there's no puckers in there at all, and no puckers in there. We've got a little fold here, but look, but what happens when I go onto it, look, it just folds out. It's just that excess of fabric, it's just the curves. And then on this side, we can see that at the actual cut edge, we've got some little undulations, which is fine. But on the actual stitching line, which is 1/4 inch in, then there's no puckers in there at all. Okay, put the ironing board out of the way for the moment. Let's go to our machine. Still got my needle turned across to the left, and I'm going to leave it there. And I am going to put my sleeve down onto the fabric edge because I want to be able to manipulate the top fabric more. 1/4 inch, and we're going to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back just to anchor those threads. And then needling the work so that we've got that down there. And then we're going to now pivot slightly to start and follow the curve over the top of the shoulder. And just like we did with the collar, we're just making sure that our fabric is lying flat underneath the needle, and sometimes you just need to pull your top out of the way, the top piece of fabric, the front, well it's actually the back I've got on the top there, but just make sure you've got no folds underneath. Do a bit and then stop, and then we can manipulate the fabric again. And as you get so far, you can always lift up the presser foot as well, and that does help to just release the fabric in order that that will all sit. Make sure your collar's out of the way. And just over the shoulder, just be particularly careful because that's where the curve is the most acute, isn't it? And then when you've gone past that section, just pull out again and just keep manipulating your fabric out of the way, and just make sure that when you put your finger down onto your fabric, there's no creases either on the inside or the outside. Sew off the edge and just reverse. There we go. Let's take our starting and stopping threads off. And let's have a little look before we undo our tacking threads. So I can see have I got a little pucker there? No, it's going to fold straight out. That's all fine. And then on my sleeve, no puckers either. So let's take our tacking threads out. If you do find you've got a pucker, just go back like we said before, take out a few stitches directly on top of that pucker, and then you'll be able to then undo a few stitches either side of it, and that will then help that thread ease out. Just make sure if you're unpicking, you're not taking out any of your stitches that you want to leave in. Just carefully sewing all of those in, haven't you, otherwise? I'll go ahead and take this out, and then we'll have a look at it, but you'll be doing exactly the same on the other side as well, so you can go ahead and do that, and then I will meet you at the end here when you've done that, and then we'll go on to the next stage. Okay, so now we've got the front all done, and we've got both of our shoulders in there. Looks like I've got a little pucker there, but I haven't. It does press out. It's not actually in the fabric. And then we are now going to just use our zigzag stitch in order to neaten these edges. So you're just going to put it back in the machine again and just zigzag over those shoulder seams, just from one arm hold to the other, and just neaten that off on both sides. Once you've done that, you're then going to come back here again. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn over this bottom hem by 1 centimetre. So again, let's measure and put our pins in to hold it in place for us. And then we're just going to press that up and in place. And we're pressing it through we've got the right side down on the ironing board, and the wrong side of the top is facing upwards. Just make sure, so you're pressing that seam to the wrong side. Just press in between the pins, and then we take our pins out, and we can just give it a press on the top just to make sure that that's held everywhere. As I say, it does just save your fingers, which is great. And then once we've done that, we're then going to turn our top over so that we've got the right, so the front of it is facing, but I've still got the wrong side up. And what we're going to do first of all is we're going to match these underarm seams. We're going to open that out and we're going to match that, and I usually put one piece of seam allowance going one way and one the other. So match that point and put a pin in to hold that. Go down to the hem. Now I'm folding out my hem because I'm going to do my sleeves afterwards, my hem slip afterwards, but if not, you might have yours together, so that's fine. Your folded edge over. Just put the pins in as you go. And then let's go down to this side bit. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to match up the notches on the side, and the two notches should match, and we're just going to pin that top just flat down there. It's through quite a few layers of fabric, so just give your pins a twist if they won't go through. And that's going to leave you, we're going to, with this section here, this long section here. And what we're going to do with that is, oh, I've got bits of thread everywhere, is, oh, let's just pin this other side first. So pin that seam together as well on the other side. And then matching our notches on the side, that'll make sure we've got everything all straight. Make sure that's all neat on the edge. Let's just fold out that sleeve edge as well. Make sure the cuff is all straight. And that's where we are. So we've got the two sides pinned here. What you're going to do now is at the bottom here, we've got that hem turned under that 1 centimetre. The folded edge is going to be taken up so that it matches exactly with the bottom of that seam just there. I'm just going to pin it in place at the top there. And you might want to put another pin just on the bottom of the hem, just to hold it steady. And again on the other side, you're just going to match that up so that it matches on there nicely. Should all lie flat for you. If you've got a little bit over the edge, don't worry about it, you can always snip that off afterwards, but just make sure that's lying nice and flat for you. And then when those two folded edges are together, I'll pick it up and show you in a second, just put a pin in just to hold those two together. So that's how it should look. So there's the folded, but there's the zigzag edge of the bottom. There you see our pocket stitching through. I'll move my finger out the shadow. There's the folded edge at the bottom of the pockets, and then this is the 1 centimetre hem we've got, and we've folded that up until the folded edge after the hem has met up with the edge of the bottom of the pocket. And then what we're going to do is take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to start at the cuff edge, and we're going to sew all the way down to the edge here. You might have to turn it over that way to sew from the back. Just make sure you're controlling these edges, you don't want those to fold out the way. And then again down here, we're going to start here and sew all the way down to here, and then we're going to finish off here. We're going to pivot at that point underarm. So let me just get my machine together. Okay, so I'm going to move my stitch now so that I'm back onto the needle being in the middle, and then that'll be nice to get my 1/4 inch seam allowance for me. And then we're going to reverse at the start and at the end. So we're going to reverse a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then we're going to put our needle in the work just to hold that still. And we can take out our first pin, and then let's just sew along there, 1/4 inch. Taking our pins out as we go. I've got my needle in my work so that it'll anchor it down for me, and we're aiming for where the stitching is that attaches the sleeves in, and that's the point we're going to stop at. When you get close, you're going to need to take your pin out, but then keep stitching on until you get to that point where you're right on top of those stitches. When you're there, leave your needle in the work, pick up your presser foot and twist it round so you can change direction, and then we're going to start again coming down the side seam Just make sure everything's all lying nice and flat and not got creased up at all, and that one's touching the other, because those have to be touching. And then we're going to sew, carry on sewing down. And then reverse at the end. Okay, take off our starting and stopping threads. And that's how that's looking now. Before you go any further, just on your underarm seam, just where you've pivoted at that point, you're going to take your scissors and you're going to just snip into that underarm seam. Not through your stitches on that seam, but just up to, but not sort of like a thread or two away from it. It just releases that seam underneath so that you're able to turn it round properly. So let's do the other. I'm going to start from the hem on this side because we have to, in order to get it to line up straight. And we tend to work with all of the fabric over to the left, don't we, anyway, generally speaking. So let's reverse here. Those are touching, so that's fine. Needle in the work, so it holds it all together. And we're still aiming for that same underarm point. When you get close, just take your pin out. A couple more stitches. There, right, and then stop. Pivot your work, make sure your raw edges are together. So they do tend to stay okay, and then across to the end here now. I'm making sure my cuff's all folded out. And then reverse at the end. Taking off our starting and our stopping threads. So we've actually got a top now, haven't we? We've actually got sleeves and everything now. So then the next thing that we can do now is we're going to turn the, we've got to snip under this arm first, haven't we? So let's go snip under the second arm as well into that pivot point. Just make sure that's nice and steady. That's right. Okay, so this is what it's looking like from the inside down that side where it's been stitched. This bit is still loose, so that is correct. And then what we're going to do then is we are going to turn out the bottom of the, so first of all, just take off the edge here, just at the bottom, so get your orientation. Here's the bottom flap. Just take off the bottom of these corners here and some of the little seam allowance there. It'll just help you with bulk. Just take those two bits off. I'm going to trim on, there's a little bit proud on one side, so just trim that off as well. That seam allowance out of there, and then we can then put your finger in the corner, we can then turn that round, and that should then sit straight up the back of the top, which is great. Oh, that's the end of the instructions. So let's turn this back round the right way round. I'm going to finish off our sleeves because we've done those separately. But we have got a little top. We've got our little pockets at the front here, one there and one here. We've got our little cowl, our little turn collar neck. And at the back here, you want to then just press this flat so that that's going to stay flat. And then in the instructions, it says to stay stitched that close. Now, I think I'm going to actually just stitch mine shut anyway. I don't see why I need to hand stitch it, but it depends whether you mind seeing the stitches along the back, and if you do, then you're going to need to hand sew that, just do a slip stitch to hand sew that shut. But I think because we've got top stitching on the front, I don't mind the top stitching on the back, so actually I am going to machine. It's not being lazy, it's just a design choice. I'm going to just do that for mine, so I'm going to fold that over. Let's put some pins in just to hold it where it needs to be, just so that it doesn't try to move on me whilst I am trying to stitch. So let's get it nice and flat. Oops, off camera a bit. So I'm just pinning that shut. It should run off onto the edge there just nicely. And also we can just, before we do that, just make sure that these corners are turned out properly just by putting a little pin in, or you can use a knitting needle, can't you, or whatever you use normally to turn your corners out. Just make sure they're turned out nice and neat for you. Because you won't be able to get back in again once you've stitched it shut, so now's the time to do that. Move my needle across to the left again because we're going to do that top stitching. I'm going to fold the fabric front out of the way to give me some room to work on this side here. I'm just going to line that up, a couple of stitches forward, a couple back, and then keep it nice and straight. Keep needling the work to hold that all still before you start taking all your pins out. And then roll the front away again so that it exposes this edge. And then we're going to just go to the end and just reverse at the edge there. Take those stitches off, those threads off. And I've just got one row of stitching around along the back. I don't mind that look at all because it matches my top stitching here. But if you don't like that, then as I say, you can hand stitch it. The other thing I'm going to do now is zigzag. Turned it around the other way. I need to neaten those edges, don't we? Let's put it onto a zigzag stitch and let's just neaten those underarm edges. That'll be fine. So I've got on a stitch length of 4 and a width of 2. When I get to the underarm, I'm going to pull that so that that's a straight line. Can you see how that's just being pulled straight? Because we've got that little notch cut out of it, that will allow it to lie flat. I'm going to stop at the end here where the top is and just reverse there. That's got that on there. See where I've stopped just there, just so that we don't run into that bottom flap at all. We don't want to do that. And you might find that your back seam allowance wants to fold out of the way, and if it does, just let it. As long as you've got the majority of it, then it shouldn't fray for you. You should be fine. Take the starting stitches off. Okay, now we can turn down the cuffs, the first little turn and then the 1 centimetre turn. So that's ½ centimetre, wasn't it? And then 1 centimetre, which we put those that memory in, didn't we, earlier with the iron. So you can see that's just folded over that cuff. And then using that same technique before, still with my needle across to the left, let's take it off zigzag before we even start this time. And then I'm just going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on there, and that should catch that down for me. So I'm starting on the underarm seam on top of there, that's the thickest part. A couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back just to anchor the threads. And then I'm just going to stop the needle in the work, and then you can just gently, you can just move it forward enough just to do a few stitches at a time, and then you just keep moving it forward towards yourself as you go. Twist your garment as well, so. But it just means you get a nice finish on the end of your sleeve then. We'll make sure that little ½ centimetre stays turned up. I'm just doing a few stitches at a time. Thread's getting caught. So I think if you've not made any alterations to your pattern, and I'll put a disclaimer on for earlier on, so that if you're working with the original pattern, not your altered pattern, I don't think that will be possible, because I think that it will be too narrow for you to be able to do that. If that's the case, the way to get a nice neat finish on your sleeve is that when you've finished your sleeve, you'll have your seam allowance sticking up like this. Just fold it to one side and put it into your machine and just put a couple of stitches to hold it across, or open it out. Well, no, you'll have zigzagged it together, won't you? But just fold it across, and that will then need to hold that down against the sleeve and not have it poking out. Hopefully that makes sense to you. It's just because one of my pet hates is when you look down a cuff and you can see the seam allowance sticking up into the cuff. So I just think, for me, that's just a no-no. So that's why I'm going to this trouble of trying to neaten off these sleeves without doing that effect. But as I say, I have done it before if you've on the unaltered ones, where you can just push the seam allowance down and then just flat and just sew it across with a couple of stitches. Okay, I'm just going to do this bit here. I'm just going to check in the instructions, make sure that I've not missed anything, and then I'll come back to you and we'll try this onto Ottoline. Okay, so let's get Ottoline ready to try on her new top. The head should go over. Still a little bit of a pull, but it does go over. Just watch your whiskers. And let's just pop one arm in here. Again, we can check that for the fit around the arm, but that fits like it should do, I think. And then again on this side just here, got some threads just loosely hanging around, but that's looking pretty good there, Ottoline. And then the collar is supposed to be turned over one turn, isn't it, for when it's worn. Let's just do that for her. And this baby cord is sewn up really nicely as well. It's been a nice fabric to work with. It's held that press really nicely. Just adjusting her side seam so that it's sitting nicely on her shoulders. I feel like I've got room for her bottom in there and for her hips, which is great, because I think it was just a bit tight before, given her different construction. And once the collar is loose, as you could see when I put it on, you do need a certain amount of room to be able to get it on. But just by adjusting the way it sits at the front and the back and sort of evening it up, it sort of loses some of that bagginess really that you need to get it on and off her. But there we go. How's that? Is she looking okay with that? And she can put her hands in her pockets if she wants to. Put one hand there, one hand there. Oops, that's pulling the front of her top down, isn't it, a little bit? But you get the gist. That's where her pockets are on the top. Right, let's put her culottes on, shall we? And just see her with the culottes on as well, because that's the outfit, isn't it? And then with the anorak over the top. And we might need to make some alterations to the anorak. I have got the kit for doing the anorak. Take your tail off for a minute. Ottoline. And as I say, there is a video for how to make the culottes on my channel as well, so that you can make those with confidence if you're a beginner sewer, or if you're just not used to and don't like reading the instructions, or you know, having to try and understand them all. Then that's all good. But there she goes. So I think that looks perfectly in scale for my Ottoline anyway, and obviously I've given you those dimensions for her. But I think that fits nicely, and obviously it's got the longer back as well. See on the side seams that little step that's been created with the longer back, and there's the shorter front where you can just see her top. Okay, I'm just going to turn the camera around and we'll have a roundup, and then I'll leave you to your own devices. Okay. All done. So I hope that you've enjoyed stitching along with me today. Ottoline's delighted to have a top now. She's not had a top for so long, it's almost embarrassing really. But I'm really pleased with how that's turned out, and I'm so pleased that I made those pattern alterations, because that does just feel like it fits her really nicely on her arms, and I say around her neck, and especially as well around those hips that are slightly wider than a normal Luna. But I hope that you've enjoyed sewing along with me today. I know it's been a bit of an ordeal if you've had to do all of the pattern alterations first and then we've had to sew it up. But I think the results speak for themselves, and as I say, I hope that you are absolutely delighted with your Fisherman's top when you come to make it for yourself as well. My thanks go to Pin and Tonic again for sponsoring the kit, and my thanks go to you as well for watching this video. And if you're not a subscriber already, I'd love it if you'd click the subscribe link for me. It doesn't cost you anything, but it just means that I know that you're there, and it's always lovely just to see that number ticking up. But obviously there's no pressure at all, because you can just dip in and out if you want to. But if you do hit the subscribe button and then you hit the notification bell as well, when I do upload any new videos, then you'll be able to see those published as well, and you'll be able to get straight onto those if you wanted to. I have got 1 or 2 kits left for the Luna Lapin makes, But just as a disclaimer, you should know that I'm not taking any new commissions for the Luna Lapin tutorials at all now. I finished doing those. I've moved my attention onto a different doll, and if you look on my channel at the other videos, you'll be able to see that. I'm not going to mention it in this video, but I have changed my focus really, and the company that I'm working with will gift me the patterns rather than and the kits, so that I don't then have to buy them with my own money, which is fabulous for me, because obviously I'm making quite a lot of these videos and to help you, and that's always very welcome to have that support from the company. So on behalf of Ottoline and I, in her lovely new top, I'm going to say a really big thank you for watching, and I'm going to wish you all happy stitching. Have a great day everybody, and I'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye.